Ah, this sure is a good Mai Tai alcohol I am enjoying on my tropical vacation beach setting. I sure did need this break from work. Just me, surf, sand, sea, and this fun little character I made. There's just one thing that's missing. It sure is relaxing not to have any work to do, but do you know what I miss? Work to do. And welcome back to Devlog. In this part, I work on some funky little 3D model character I made. I want to animate her. She's very squishy and small. Her proportions are that of a small little elf. I want to squeeze her between my hands like a little stress ball. Let's animate her now. The first thing I did was make her fun little 3D model. This is a, surprisingly complicated thing to do. You see, the way I normally make a 3D model is that I make the 3D model in a logical sense. But for this character, since she has wacky 2D proportions, being that she kind of looks and behaves a lot like a cartoon, her proportions and modeling are significantly more suited to this. You may be able to tell from first initial viewage that all of her limbs are separate. This is so that they can be moved independently in a world space, in opposed to being completely attached at the shoulder. The way they would normally work is that the limbs are attached at the shoulder and you can't just rip them off. But for this character, the limbs are just detachable, and this will come into play when I talk about animation. But just keep in mind, it's for the animations. Her proportions are really soft and squishy. Essentially, all I did was I used a subdivide function, which makes the model smoother on a lot of the character, while also separating objects using a edge split function, which can separate based on where I add a specific line. So, for example, the fingertips end in a flat little nub, and the same as our horn. They both end in a flat little nub because I added a edge split function on these surfaces so that they are more smoothed out. Or they're not smoothed out. So these surfaces are not smoothed out and maintain their stylized look, so the character doesn't look like a smooth little mesh. But she is pretty smooth. I love her smooth little face. The same is for the parts of the body that look like they're together. The body, torso, belt and skirt and little potions on her hip are all completely different models. They can be stretched and pulled off the character, and they're also rigged separately as well, so these can also be moved off the character pretty easily. So if I wanted to, none of the animations do this, but if I wanted to, the belt could come completely off, or the skirt could be stretched down. But I will talk about that when I talk about the rigging. The hair is separated into two sections, this being the hair that is in front of the character's face and the hair that is behind the character's face. This is just for a layering issue when I animate, so I will talk about this when I go into animation. But essentially, since the character is being viewed from a flat forward view, there's no perception on this, so the hair can just float in front of the character's head. They're just very blocky, blob-like hair models. Firstly, because I was too lazy to make detailed hair, and I felt like the blocky, blobby sort of hair fits her stylization a whole lot more. It's just very goofy looking, it's very silly. It's just the kind of hair stylization that you would see on a cartoon character, like the one I used for inspiration in this character design. The inspiration for this character's initial visage is the Netflix animated series and also comic book series Hilda. The main character of that is a girl. She has blobby hair. That's sort of the idea I was going for with the hair. It is essentially just like a long hair model, but very stylized so you don't get any of the detailing of the hair. On her back, she has a frying pan, which fits into her character design, which I'll get into in a moment. On her belt, she has some little potions. These are achieved with back-face culling, so essentially what would be the front of the potion bottle is the back of the potion bottle, so you can see through it, and it gives this impression of there being liquid in the potion without me having to use any level of transparency to give the actual impression of the potions being made out of a glass bottle. They're just sort of a shader trick, or a modeling trick. Onto the character's head, she has pointy little ears, for she is a lovely elf who I love. She has a big nose, which I just like a lot. Here's a tip for character design. If you give a character a well-formed, large, pointy, or otherwise stylized nose that sticks out from the face, you've got a 10 out of 10 character design right there. It always looks good when you give characters defined noses. This is once again another character design feature that was sort of something to make her more distinguished, the same as her little horn. It's just so that I think a normal little nose would look a bit too basic and boring, and her having this really long pointy thing gives a much more fantasy and silly looking visage to her nose. And also I can animate it bouncing around, mostly so I could animate the nose bouncing around. She has no mouth, because I really like that book. She has no mouth because I feel like a mouth would be a bit too busy on the face. She has gigantic eyes, so that sort of evens out the non-existing mouth. She just has blinking emotions, happy emotions, glaring emotions, shocked emotions, and hurt emotions. These are using my code animated through Unity Space, so they're not currently animated in any of these animations in current viewing space. Overall, I really like how this character turned out. She has a very, very stylized view to her character. As you can tell from any idle poses, her limbs are completely larger than her torso and her head. She looks a little bit gangly and lanky, I guess would be the terminology, even though in universe she's probably 2 inches tall. She's just a very stylized character, and the reason I wanted to make a heavily stylized character is because I think heavily stylized characters look better with heavily stylized animations. Let's talk about animations next. Let's talk about the character's color design. I mostly just played about with the colors until I found something that was satisfying. I really like the view of the character having this bright, colorful clothing, but the skin being a bit a darker shade of red. This is for the optimal character design of making the hair and skin color dark shades while having the clothing being lighter shades. There's not a whole lot of design nuance to the color scheme. I just picked something that I felt would be interesting and fun, and because this game uses a gradient pattern for character texturing, as in I can just pick and choose when I need something to change colors, I can easily change this in the future if I don't like her little color scheme, but I like it as it currently is. The red against the blue stands out in any setting. If you're in a fiery area, the blue will stand out. If you're in underwater areas, the red will stand out. And then she has an orange as an accent mark on the hat and belt and handle of her frying pan. So, I don't have anything else to say about this. I just think the colours look okay. Next is the rigging of the character. This is an incredibly specific way to accommodate for the animations I have been making or been wanting to make for the character. What this is I want the character to be viewed from a non-perspective based 2D view, so the character doesn't have to look fine from a three-dimensional view. You can tell this when the character is moving. If I tilt the camera, they look very silly because the bones and body parts are just moving in three-dimensional space, so the view of all the animations only look good from one angle because the view of the animations are only going to be viewed from one angle. So it's completely fine, don't worry about it too much. Because of this, a lot of the bones and body parts are detached or not attached to their current respective bone, so the arms can be completely detached from the body. This is for when you're tilting. I just move the arms where they would organically probably be positioned. The body parts, like the hands, can be stretched away from the arms, so while they cannot be detached, they can be stretched and make the arm look longer or shorter than it needs to be. In certain animations, the head is detachable, the hair is layered, so I can just place it and animate it however I want. The hat is not even attached to the head, it just bounces on top of the character's head. The same with the frying pan, it's just laying somewhere between the back and the end hair layer. And the legs are also detachable. These just make it so I can make more stylized animations. I can just move the limbs wherever they need to be without there being any issue of the body parts deforming in any way. This is also where the character is wearing a skirt, because I need to hide the fact that the legs are just floating in space. There are some bones that are attachable, like the nose and ears, just because these don't need to be pulled off the face at any point. And this overall makes animation somewhere between very easy and very hard. It makes it easy because I can very easily pose things and have the character move in specific ways, but very hard because I can't have the character mirror any animations, and I have to position things just to make sure there isn't any clipping, because clipping can happen incredibly easy with this system because all the body parts are detached and floating in space, and I can have the hair or arms just clip into the body because I've just moved them incorrectly. So if I'm being careful, this is a better system than regular animation or regular rigging setups, but if I'm not being careful and I'm being really lazy, I can really muck up the process. Let's hope I don't do that at any points. At this point, you may be wondering why I picked a 3D model instead of a 2D sprite animations for working in a two-dimensional game, and I had originally attempted to make this a two-dimensional sprite, as in rendering this 3D model in a sprite system and then drawing over the images so they looked more two-dimensional, or just rendering them out in a way that looked two-dimensional. However, there was issues with any of these systems, the first being that the player has to, mostly for my needs of this game system, to work in a 3D model, so I can add things like physics-controlled hair on the back of her head, which would be controlled by the physics in future updates, or things like blending between animations, which is harder to achieve in two-dimensionals. You can if you use a two-dimensional rig, but I'll get onto why I didn't use those. And I'm also just more comfortable and used to using a three-dimensional rig. I do 3D animation, so it's kind of what I do. It's easier. I had originally attempted to use this base as a render and then draw over the limbs to use as a two-dimensional rig, as in having all the limbs rendered out and then drawing over them to make them more stylized. And this was okay. I will probably include an image right here of how it looked, maybe. I had a lot of fun drawing the character. I just felt like personally, with my animation style, I felt like I would have a lot more difficulty with this, as in I would have to make a lot of two-dimensional bone poses and body poses to have all the animations I wanted for the game, and this might be a bit unruly given the amount of body poses that are needed and my speed at drawing, because even if I'm not a 2D animator, I still like to draw in 2D. It's just it takes me a whole lot longer to do. I wouldn't want to spend weeks coloring in an arm, for example. Even if it's fun, it's more fun for me to do more in a time frame than just spend weeks drawing the sprites for something and then having to animate those in 2D. I'm also not particularly familiar with two-dimensional rigging. I mean, the principles are the same, it's just not something I'm used to animating in, so I felt like a lot of the animations would look rather subpar if I did that, and I'd have to redo them, and overall, it's just easier for me to use three-dimensionals. Now let's talk about the animations, the real meat and potatoes of this devlog. As I mentioned, all the animations are made with the rigging, so if I tilt the camera, you can see that the player's body parts are all floating in space, but when the camera is focused in the front view, the player looks completely fine. This is just the angling of how these animations are done, and this makes it so that the animations can be a lot more stylized. The first animation is the idle pose. This is just the character standing there with her gangly little limbs wobbling backwards and forwards. This isn't the best idle pose, and that's because I'm wanting to add a system for idle fidgets. If you don't know what that is, it's if you are playing a video game for a while and you leave your character on that idle pose, they will start to fidget around. So an example for this is if you leave a character on that idle pose, they will loop into random fidget animations. One of them could be looking towards the character's camera, so looking at the player who's playing the game and tapping their foot impatiently. So I want to add a system for creating those or blending into those when the player is idle. So right now the idle pose is just a little wobble that can be blended into the movement poses. The next pose is the walking pose. This is one of those transitional poses, transitional animations that is mostly just used for blending and easing. So the character blends into this pose when they begin to run. Because the character and game ideally is not going to use a whole lot of low movement speeds, I want to have high movement speeds. So the walking is just your going from your idle into your jog, into your run, into your sprint. This is just the beginning of motion of your character moving. There's a nice little wobble with the character. One technique I use a lot with this is the spine. I will scale up and down in certain points. This is more obvious in other animations, but when the character is bobbing up and down as they're walking, the spine is being stretched and extended, so it looks like there's more motion and bob in them. This is just to get the sort of stylization look that I want to. The arms kind of wobble about, but they have the motion of movement, and the feet just move back and forth as you take little steps. As you can see in motion, this is much more obvious that the body parts are detached from the body. As you can see, the legs are just sort of moving relatively where they should be under the skirts, but they're not at all keeping uniform of where they should be if you were paying attention to anatomy of the character, and the arms are just moving back and forth so that their relative position on the shirt is maintained as you are walking, but overall it's not actually attached to a fixed point on the shirt. Her hat has a nice little bounce to it. In some of the other animations, this hat just floats off the head because it has the illusion of you going faster if it's just bobbing up and down, but for this one it's just bobbing up and down as you walk, and the character just has a nice little pose as they walk. The next animation is the jogging animation. This one's real silly. I quite like it a lot. It looks very stiff if you ask me. This one's an especially transitional animation, meaning that it's mostly used when the character is going from a walk to a run. This is just to blend the two animations together a lot more. This animation is definitely the one that's going to be seen the least. I do kind of like it, even if it is very dorky looking. The character has this really stiffness to how they move their arms and legs, but in a way that's not unappealing, I suppose. This animation is the most likely to be changed, so I'm not going to talk about it for very long, but I do like how it looks. It's just kind of a goofy little run. In fact, I think this animation would look a whole lot better in game if the player was running in place. It doesn't look like the kind of jogging animation that the player is going to be moving with. It looks like the kind of thing that the player would be using to build speed as they were standing still to sort of get into the customs of movement. So maybe I could use it for something like that, like a ability to charge up your speed, maybe. The next animation is the run animation. This is the animation I made first. This is the first animation I made to test out the rig, and I really like how it looks. It has a huge amount of bounce to the character as they descend after one step and then push themselves upwards, and they have more stretched out motions to them. Their hat bobs around as they run about, their hair wiggles, even though in the future that will be animated with physics. Just an overall very fun animation to do, and I think it looks very fun in-game. There's a lot of weight to the character, but also you get that cartoonish appeal. There's very large follow-through with the limbs, or I suppose it's not really follow-through. Essentially, once you've made the left to right pose of you moving, the arms and legs stick there for 4 frames, so you really get the momentum of your arms and legs sticking forwards. I'm not particularly sure what that terminology is, but Basically, the arms and legs stay in place for a few frames before quickly shifting sides. This is just more weight to the character's movements, and I like how it looks a whole lot. The next animation is the sprinting animation, a way more exaggerated version of the run animation. The hat is now tilting backwards with its hat bones. Don't worry about what those do. And there is a lot more weight to your character. Your hair is running about in the breeze. There's some more weight to your limbs as you are very quickly pushing them back and forth. Your character is basically running through the air for a lot of these frames. The reason for this is that the character has more of a cartoony style, so there's a lot of run animations where they are just hovering in midair as they are running. I don't think it looks too glaring for the player. Hopefully. Maybe. Fingers crossed. The sprint animation has a whole lot of exaggeration in its movements. There's a whole lot of leg kick and arm movements. Your character looks a lot more stretched forward and leaning forward than they did in other animations. It is a nice little animation. I'm very proud of it. But those are all the basic baby animations, your regular walk cycles. Let's go into the actual animations that are more interesting. The jump poses are the poses you make in midair. So these are your falling upwards, falling downwards, and your jump. I really like jump. I really like how it looks. There's your character squished down at the beginning and then very plainly stretching out before transitioning to your mid-air animation. It has a lot of exaggeration of your character, but not a huge amount, as we will see in another jump animation I'm about to show you. But your character very heavily stretching as they jump up. It has some cartoonish weight to it. I'm a big fan of this animation. The next animation is the super jump, which is the way more exaggerated version. This is your character stretching much more exaggeratedly and then backflipping as they are jumping. This is an animation that is played when the character initially lands from a great height, or when you jump straight after landing. So you land and then you press your input. You press your input very quickly and you perform a super jump, which is a higher than regular jump. The next animation is the turning animation. These are just to give the illusion of the character turning. At this point, I only have the turning slow animation. I probably made the other ones, but I haven't made them at the current point of recording the audio, so I can't talk about them. But this is just to give the character the impression that they are turning around. When you press your inputs the opposite direction, your character will turn around. Your character will be flipped on their axis. Using a scale modifier so they can face the other direction. I don't have to make animations for running in the other direction because that would not work with this rig even slightly at all. But the character is just giving the impression that they're turning. So it's slightly facing the other direction and then transitioning into the walk idle pose of the other direction that they are wanting to move into. This animation is going to be played maybe 3 animations in game. It's very quickly for the turning slow animation, but it's set at 50 frames of the saved animation just so I can easily stretch this out in game in editor. And finally, we have the bouncing animations. These are the animations for you bouncing off objects. The first one is you bouncing in the direction, so either left or right, essentially for bounce off an object that wasn't just primarily vertical. This is us, again, stretching downwards and then initially very quickly stretching outwards for your impression of motion. And then I drop my microphone. And then you're doing a front flip as you carry on this momentum. And after you've done your front flip, there is a further stretching of your character for more viewing of momentum, and you're into your air pose like normal. We then have your bouncing upwards. This one is very similar, but it's just moving upwards and there isn't a flip for obvious reasons. The character is just stretching very quickly upwards and then stretching downwards to their normal in-air animation. These are both very fun animations to do. They are the most two-dimensional looking. They have a lot of exaggeration and really show off why I like using this rig so much and why I made this rig in such a specific way so I could do animations like this. The final animation is the landing roll animation. This is if you are landing from a height while you are moving at a certain point. So the animation that would usually play when you land from a height is it would apply a lerp between your crouching animations and your normal animations, so you blend between those to get the impression of landing. But if you land from a great height, we will continue our momentum and we will roll forwards. This is our character landing, squishing, rolling, and then stretching out of their animation and then transitioning into another animation, whatever running animation we're currently set up as. And that's all the animations I made for this character. This is basically, I know I made a convoluted name for whatever game this is called, but you can just think of it as Alice's big old excuse to animate in 2D, because that is exclusively why I wanted to do this. I just wanted to make some 2D animations, or animations that look two-dimensional or were stylized in a two-dimensional way. So that's why I did this and why I made all these animations, and I like them a lot, except for the jogging animation. I could do without that one, but the other ones are all pretty good. And that's about it for this devlog. This is just something I wanted to do as a break from my current three-dimensional game project. I've not really worked a whole lot in 2D for devlogs I've made. I've made a lot of 2D projects in the past, but I felt like doing a more two-dimensional focused game project on the YouTubes. And by that I mean I just wanted to do it for myself, and I don't particularly care about the consistency of my YouTube channel. In the next video, there won't be one because it will be Christmas Day. In the video after that, it will be significantly longer or shorter, depending on if I just make a short update video on this project or if I make a long form video on what I've been doing. But the next video will be about the momentum movement setup system, which will be, I'm just going to say it right now to assume, convoluted and long form. So enjoy my 1 hour devlog in 2 or 3 weeks.